How has the concept of flow impacted your life, if at all? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Cameron Norsworthy, and this is your podcast for human performance. In this upcoming episode, I have a conversation on finding flow in ourselves and in our coaching and working with others with Damon Valentino, Director of Mental Fitness for the Professional Tennis Players Association and founder of Side Street Performance Coaching. Damon has spent decades exploring the intersection of performance, psychology and flow, first as a competitive athlete and later as a coach and mental performance specialist working with elite performers around the world. In this conversation, we explore Damon's early experiences of flow as a young athlete, his profound findings on flow, and how many of the barriers to high performance aren't about adding more skills, but about letting go of the things that get in the way. We also dive into the tension many high performers experience between striving and well-being, and how reconnecting with curiosity, play, and embodiment can unlock a deeper level of performance. I really enjoyed this conversation with Damon, and I hope you do too. Let's dive in.
Flow Unleashed.
Damon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cameron. Glad to be here.
Whereabouts are you at the moment in the world?
I'm in a little town called Traverse City. It's in northern Michigan, right on Lake Michigan.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm excited to chat to you because we were just chatting off air and you were saying that we've in some ways lived parallel lives, which is true with our tennis and passion for flow and the mental game and helping athletes and high achievers not only perform well but feel good about it. What has been your relationship with flow throughout your life?
Flow is something that I first experienced as a freshman in high school. So had no idea about flow. I was an athlete growing up, and at this time I was running cross country on my varsity cross country team. The night before the varsity big meet, my coach calls me, and I was the eighth guy on the team, so I was on JV, wasn't expecting to run the next day. And he's like, "Hey, Valentino, you're in. Our number one guy broke his ankle." So, a flood of nerves and adrenaline the night before, barely slept, get out to the race. It's a cold kind of fall morning. And I remember the gun, shot off and we just all took off in this straightaway heading into the forest. And I remember like 400 or 500 yards in, I was already exhausted. I thought I was going to throw up even before we even got a quarter of a mile into the race. And then I hit the forest and something very odd happened to me. I lost all sense of pain, and it was almost as if I was observing the race. Mind you, I was eighth on my team. There's probably 200 people in this race. And when I got to the first mile, I was running the first mile in the fours, which I had never done before. And I was in fifth place in the whole race. And again, it was almost like I was a spectator. It was surreal. I went on to finish third in that race. And, when I finished, I remember going home and just sitting in my room thinking, what the hell was that? I had never run anywhere close to that time before. I'd certainly never felt that good while running. And come to find out later in life, I tried to run like that again throughout the season. Didn't happen. So that was a really definitive experience for me, fully embodied, where I was feeling my best, I was performing my best, and just that flood of neurochemicals were just kind of took over my body. And so that being one, and then I guess another experience on the tennis court where, the ball looked like a beach ball, seemed like everything I hit was going to go in, seemed like I was one step ahead of my opponent, kind of floating around the court. So as a young teenager, it was my first experiences with it. Of course, I had no knowledge or ability to put any words to it, and certainly no ability to try to create the conditions to do it again.
Yeah, those moments when we're young or we don't have to be young, but those moments where those experiences of flow really make a mark in our consciousness and really make us stand up and go, oh, that was very different. They're so memorable. I've got my memories, and when I regress to them now, it almost feels like it was yesterday. And they're some of the most powerful memories in terms of the richness of the information that comes to my mind and body and my emotions when I think about them. It's quite amazing.
Really is. And it's almost, to your point, it's a memory, but it's like an imprint in the body as well. I can recall that race, but that I can also feel the, the residue of it is still kind of alive inside of me.
Mm. And what have you learned about flow over the years and decades of examining it and having it as a bit of a true north for your life?
Yeah, had a pretty good college career as a tennis player, played at Michigan State University, tried to play a little bit on the tour after school, and then did what most tennis players do, and that is turn to coaching. After that, my stint didn't really work out too successfully, and at that time I read The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Gallwey.
What a bit.
And yeah, right. And it really kind of revolutionized just the way I was perceiving even watching other people play tennis or even coaching tennis. So, like I always had that sense that there's another way of going about things. And it really impacted my coaching and really getting into the depth of trying to articulate not just strokes and technical, tactical stuff, but how one might be using their mind to generate the result. So yeah, I was always very contemplative as a person in my 20s and did a lot of travel in, country like Asian countries. And I think through travel, I also experienced flow, where I started to really, certain parts of my personality that may have been traditional when I was, say, in northern India, felt almost offline, and I felt like in a different physiological body in these times. And so I ultimately ended up going to graduate school for sports psychology. And I remember being in school and feeling like, yeah, I think there's obviously value to SMART goals and all of the other things that we're learning, visualization, etc. But I stumbled on Stephen Kotler's book, The Rise of Superman, when I was in graduate school. And it really struck me how these athletes were sort of exponentially improving. And so, I took a deep dive, really leaned into that from there. Obviously, then going back to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and the foundations of flow, I was just really drawn to it and have found that it's become part of the tapestry of what I do when I work with athletes or performers of any kind, actually.
Can we just go back, if I may, and just unpack the impact the Inner Game of Tennis had on you? I'm curious, because it had a huge impact on my life as well, and I'm curious as to what are the key messages for you that you really took away from that book and series?
Yeah. And I guess to paraphrase the key messages, it's that we don't have to be so attentive to our own capabilities. In other words, getting out of our own way, I think, was like a really key one for me. And one passage in there where he's talking about just seeing the ball landing where you want it to land, and or paying attention to the spin on the ball itself. Really what's happening, I think, there is lack of protection in terms of our own ego and, kind of, in other words, telling ourselves what it is that we need to do. And I think when we release from that and allow the body to just sort of intuitively do, something amazing can happen from there. Doesn't mean you're going to make all of your shots, obviously, but there's something incredibly liberating about, in my vernacular, getting off of selfie mode, where it's me and I'm talking to myself about what it is that I need to do, and letting the intuition, letting just my body, trusting in the process of letting my body do what it knows how to do, and giving the mind a job to do, as opposed, instead of worrying about how I look and what it is that I'm doing. So that's a key one, I think, for me.
Yeah, that relationship between the I and the me, that was self-reflective me that consumes so much of our attentional bandwidth. And that volitional I, it's interesting when we look at brain damaged patients, how they can lose a lot of the capacity for me and that self-reflective conscious thinking that ordinarily we might put as the apex of a human asset. But even with that gone, and even with memories gone of the past, they still have this volitional sense of I, and they're still able to tap into some sort of intuitive sense, which is really, really, really interesting. And I think that nowadays with cognitive neuroscience, we have a look at the dual cognition theories and so forth that help us unpack that a little bit as to what's happening there. But similar to you, I really got a lot from that message of trusting that innate talent, trusting that intuitive self. And often when I'm working with people, there's this premise that I guess comes through indirectly with some of my teachings around helping people to connect with their intuition. Often, including myself at times, it feels lost. There's so much noise. There's so much like stuff going on in my head. There's so much pressure from the external world, whether it's environmental, cultural, political, family of origin stuff, or just people just not processing their own past traumas and daily life experiences. There's just this constant noise, which is totally consuming the attentional bandwidth that we have and pressuring us to conform or just do enough or just get by or just not necessarily aim for being our best and aiming to being our actualized self, but just kind of let's survive and move on. And in that process, we suppress that inner inspiration, that kind of intuitive voice that might have us feel different or might have us do something differently. How do you, having worked with so many elite professionals, how do you see that kind of conflict rise in people, and how do you help them find their way to that intuitive sense of self?
I really appreciate you saying all of that, first of all. And as I hear you saying those things, this is a lifelong endeavor. And I think one of the things that I try to explore with people who are after big goals and massive dreams is this sense of that it never ends, right? There's never a place where you're on the top of the mountain. You end up getting on top of a peak, and then when you get up there, you realize there's just more mountains around. So I think first it's just that larger, more universal perspective that I like to at least explore and help people to gently remove some of those guardrails for what it is that they think is the path towards the ultimate achievement for themselves. And really, while that's happening, while they're exploring and endeavoring to do great things, trying to also bring online the experience of just being a human being and how that everything that we do has some sort of impact on our capacity to either learn more about ourselves or to think a little bit bigger or to release a little bit of that self-limiting belief in our own selves. I say all the time, it's an inside job. And I think sometimes when I say that, people roll their eyes because we live in a bottom line world. And of course that matters. But I think once we normalize the fact that there's no there really to achieve, and that there's this cyclical process of we're anchored around specific values and the curiosity of what it is that continues to show up, and I think it ends up becoming very liberating for somebody who's after big things to realize that every experience there's a richness to experience itself. And by continuing to open that parameter up wider and wider, that there's room and there's space. And in that spaciousness, I think there's a way to sort of perceive self and perceive the endeavor that they're after, relationships that they're in, through a different lens. And the work can be the same, but our perspective of the work can continue to change. And I think that for me, the athletes and CEO types that I've worked with that have really made that breakthrough have genuinely leaned into that exploration. And within that exploration, something, jostles and potentially unlocks a little bit, or at least that's been my experience personally and also as a guide to high performers. And so normalizing the fact that the process is hard, creating strategies to continue to tinker and explore and experiment, but underneath it all, shifting that self-reference and also the bill of goods that we all tend to buy into when we're younger, and those being that once we achieve the gold medal, or once we make the million, or once we win Wimbledon, or we score the big deal, that suddenly I will transform and many of my problems or issues will go by the wayside. And obviously some of the most miserable people are the most successful. And I think that what I've tried to impart on people I work with is you can have it all. You can be in process of continuing to develop as a human and still get the reps, get your work in, and go after big things. So sometimes it's a tougher sell than others, but for me at least, that it feels like, philosophically, it feels like the approach that I'm aligned with. And, sometimes I'm not the right fit for somebody, and that's okay too.
It's an interesting one, that point you just made of people being successful but being unhappy. I see so much effort, attention, energy pointed towards physical gains, nutritional gains, technical gains, pushing on. Like, there's so much money and time that goes into coping better. And so many strategies people grow up with, when we look at it, I guess, from a psychological lens, there's a coping methodology to it. And that can be important. And when we're young, that can almost feel like survival. If you're being bullied at school and you've got to survive in the playground and still have some friends to talk to, or if you make a mistake on the sports pitch and you're embarrassed and you go red and you've still got to survive and keep face. And all these sort of situations, when we're young, we develop these coping mechanisms, or as psychology would say, these sort of adapted patterns of thinking and behavior, which get us through, help us to push on. But it builds this sort of grittedness inside of us, this idea that to achieve, we need to push, force it, get over the line, no pain, no gain. All those sort of old classic 1960s sort of sports psychology messages.
Suck it up.
Suck it up, that a lot of coaches are still, from the sporting world at least, still harping on about. And sometimes these messages don't change, especially in the corporate world. When you've got institutions and organizations that have been running for tens and hundreds of years, the culture is glacial, like really old, and people hire people who back their microculture and support their views and the way they operate and the way they lead. And the point I'm getting to is that there's so much effort put towards maintaining these methods of achieving what we want to achieve through coping. And if I can just cope better, then things will be okay. If I can just push harder, then things will be okay. And when people often come to me, I really resonated with what you said then. I'm often helping them see a new way to perform, right? Where flow is at that centerpiece, we can say, well, actually, well-being and performance, they're not mutually exclusive. For performance to be sustainable, we need to be at our best continuously. And that means having a good sense of well-being. And even in the moment, whilst we can force ourselves over the line, if we've got that much tension in our body, then we're probably not being as agile, as flexible physically or mentally as we could. And we could probably get over the line a lot quicker, a lot faster, or in a more connected, cohesive way in a team. And that switch I find really interesting in terms of helping people pass that. And I imagine there's a lot of people listening who either resonate with that individually with their own journey, or working with others who we might be harping on one message where when people, I guess, first hear what we're talking about, there's this, oh, that's just nice thinking. Oh, I can't do that, my standards will drop. Or it feels like there's this looseness to it, or lack of strength to that approach, where the opposite, for me at least, couldn't be further from the truth. Does that resonate with you, and how do you help people shift from one place to the other?
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates with me. I really appreciate that perspective. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like you can draw a line between what we were talking about with the inner game of tennis and like the liberation from just self-referential living and performing, and flow, where we quite literally have our frontal language going dormant when we're in that state. And when I run a 30-day flow challenge for executives and for players, and the first week is all about the flow blockers, the things that sort of get in the way. And I think that's counterintuitive as well, where, we have athletes who primarily are like, I need to break through my ceiling. And that idea of needing to be more to be able to get over the line faster. And I like to start with what can we and what do we need to release? What are we carrying around with us that is inhibiting our ability to kick ourselves into that state? And I think it's a foreign concept that, wait a minute, you're saying I'm enough in a way, and there's some baggage that I need to let go of. I like to start there because it's counterintuitive. Most people are like, what's the next skill I need to develop to be able to improve? And I think that we run the risk of that 50s paradigm that you're talking about, where it's not just suck it up, it's a fix it mentality, as if something's broken. And I think when we are approaching our endeavors as if we are needing to put more pieces together for us to be able to achieve something greater, we run the risk of being or assuming we're broken in some way. And so I think there is something about that is generative for people to explore, first just as a concept, but then as a practice. The concept being, oh, wow, I can release something. I can let go of things, or there are things in the way of my natural abilities to perform my best. And that experiment becomes really interesting because, to your point, what are the things that we're holding on to? Is it I'm trying to prove something to somebody? Did somebody tell me I'm not enough? The bully in the playground, am I still trying to overcome that? All the things in life that may provide some kind of motivation, but flow is autotelic, and it is we simply enjoy doing it for its own sake. And I think that when we can align those forces, where releasing what we don't need, but then importantly understanding that flow has a cycle, and the front end of the cycle is struggle. And so I think having a new relationship with some of the old challenges can be quite interesting to explore. If you look at a young baby who's crawling and it's learning how to walk, it probably wobbles and falls hundreds of times before it ultimately ends up figuring out how to walk. But there isn't an inherent frustration around, I'm never going to get it. This sense of shame because they haven't been able to accomplish it is almost like this diabolical look in a young human's eye that is still trying to figure it out. And I think if we can remember that we're wired for this and that we're wired to continue to evolve and grow, then we're shifting our perspective from the external, and we're really owning our own experience. And the model of flow, I think, is so brilliant. Obviously, it's, the evidence of flow has been well researched, but again, it's easier to, I think, prioritize challenges and also recovery for an athlete to see these things, or a performer to see them as a competitive advantage. So yeah, like releasing from what it is that's holding us back from being our natural self, I think is something that is worthy of some exploration. And then of course, building some training around that concept as well.
Yeah, I really like your point there around there's a narrative that things are broken and they need fixing. And a lot of it comes from the psychological world. Money was originally put back to help fix soldiers who'd become mentally fragmented from war, and lots of money was pumped into research to try and fix these broken people. And years, decades later, a lot of the research was about labeling problems and fixing things. And now in 2025, there's a shift towards, well, there's still a lot of clinical psychology and a lot of research around identifying, labeling, and fixing. But there's also a lot of research towards the positive side of psychology, which is looking at, okay, where do we want to be? And how are the people who are there doing it? And how can we habitualize these great things as opposed to just try and fix the old things? And as Martin Seligman once said, just because we fix the problem doesn't mean that we're going to create the good. I've bastardized his words there, but essentially saying we can't just lead a void. We need to build habits around where we want to go. And part of that issue is psychology itself and the legacy of how practitioners, where other people go to for guidance and support, might feel the need to label and fix because it might make them look more authoritative, more competent. But there's also this internal narrative that you just talked about as well, where if something isn't right or perfect, there's shame. There's something wrong. I need to fix it. And as kids, we don't have that. We just keep trying. And that relationship we have with challenge, that relationship we have with complexity. As adults, I often see us sort of become safer, right? We shy away from that failure. We don't put ourselves in position where we can take those positive risks and play with that novelty. But as kids, we're wanting to do it all the time. We seek it out in the playground. That's kind of what playgrounds are for, right? Is to enjoy those moments where we're teetering on the edge and popping into flow or not. When you work with, let's say, an athlete or an executive, and you're able to help them see that, and you're able to help them shift that, the way they approach a challenge, to bring it really back to basics, their relationship with approaching difficulty. What's the upside of that? Do you want to help others unleash their performance? Do you want an internationally recognized accreditation to stand out amongst the crowd? Or do you want the playbook I use every day when helping professionals to be their best and find their flow when it matters most? If this sounds interesting, join others who are training to become a high-performance coach. We are on a mission to train a fellowship of expert practitioners and coaches to work with us and help make the world a better place. To find out more, go to flowcoachingfederation.org and check out the Flow Coach accreditation today.
Well, the upside is, I think, number one, that we're really promoting being fully in the present moment. And we're living in the present moment, not within the narrative of success or failure or past mistakes or what are they going to think of me, but fully present, mindful, energized, vital, curious. And I think when those things are online for a person, they recognize more patterns. They're putting different creative pieces together. Different parts of their brain are speaking to one another that are allowing them to literally see in a new way or in a more rich way. And when a person has that felt experience, it speaks for itself. And ultimately the goal is, at least for me, is for someone to have that felt experience, because it transcends language, and it really does catapult their former thinking and really shake their former thinking. And once you've had that experience, you can't go back to whatever self-perceived limitation that you identified with, because you have changed. You've literally changed. And neuroscience has really supported so much of what we're speaking about right now. And I'm really grateful for all the research that now exists, where we know about neuroplasticity, and we know about the brain being a prediction-making machine, and we know about just the survival mechanisms that we tend to fall into. And so there's something just deeply liberating. And, you talk about play. You're right. Adults don't play anymore. It's very rare. Even play when you're an adult is usually structured. And so that intuitive felt experience in the moment, where it might be a challenge that's been around for a long time, but if we're able to crack through that and get out of our own way to some degree, we move from fixing, in my opinion, to transforming. Do we necessarily get over the line and in the record time? No, not necessarily, but we are more alive in the experience that we are in. And by being more alive in that experience, we're really generating our fullest capacity. And I think if we generate that and really prioritize that, oftentimes I like that person's chances to be able to produce their best work, or to be able to ascend to whatever heights it is that they're after. And so it's a game of trust at the beginning, but I'm always searching for the opportunity to shine a light on that felt experience. I had a player recently, a high-level tennis player, who finally, upon debrief, was like, something clicked out there today that I showed up differently. And to me, that's when I resonate and really want that person to embody, what did it feel like? Identify it in your body, right? And in so many ways, a lot of this comes down to getting beyond thinking and being human body, moving through space, and having an interaction with other humans or whatever it is that they're having, like kids do on the playground. Kids are not in their minds when they're climbing on the monkey bars and playing a game of tag or ball when you're 10, 11 years old. And so in some ways, going back to that state is such an important part of this whole journey, I believe, towards truly elite performance. I think those that most of them that figure it out and can sustain it have in some which way found their way into this embodied state, where they're beyond language, where they're beyond results, and they're fully immersed in the moment. And that's just highly pleasurable to be in that state.
And often the response I get when I almost say those same words to people is like, oh, yeah, but I don't have time to play. I mean, what? Seriously? They don't necessarily say those words, but I can almost feel and see that coming off their face and going through their minds. And it's amazing how we might expect the mind just to click into flow when we need it at a particular time. But it takes training, and it takes us to have that play in perhaps a safer, segregated time and space, to embed those skills. So then when we do come back to our area of professional goals or whatever it is, and if we're, as you pointed out, one of the ways of entering flow is through that struggle. If we do come across that struggle, then we've got that embedded approach. We've got those skills hardwired into our system that we can then apply. But if we haven't given that space to train them, then we can't expect our mind just to apply those skills under pressure. Under pressure, we default to our most core ideas, our most entrenched patterns of behavior. We go back to our central wiring, if you like. So we need to put that effort in. And we're often, as a race, we're quite happily to go to the gym and run 1,000 miles and put the effort in physically. But often we're not happy to put that effort in mentally. And I'm often talking about this concept of becoming flow fit and having an attitude of being flow fit. And I know you talk a lot about mental fitness. What do you mean by mental fitness, and how can people bring this inner practice into a day-to-day part of their life?
Yeah, my first thought is that parable about the two fish swimming along, and this elder fish swims up to them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two fish look at each other and they say, "What the hell's water?" And the point being that they're so fully immersed in this thing, it's so all-consuming that it's invisible. They don't even take it into account. And that's why I think this is so important, that we have to shine a light on it. We have to find ways to be creative about training it. We have to find ways to loosely measure our experience within flow, because it's invisible. It's easy to measure bicep, how much we're benching. It's easy to measure how much creatine to put in my shake in the morning. These are all very obvious things, whereas most of the things that we're talking about are invisible. And so I think firstly, trying to create some narratives around conceptually what it is. I mean, 50 years ago, physical fitness was seen as being a little crazy. 50 years ago, people didn't go to the gym, and physical fitness wasn't a thing. Professional baseball players would party all off season. They'd show up to spring training, they'd put their cigarette out, and they'd start to try to get into shape, and then they go play the game. So physical fitness has now come a long ways. And so I use physical fitness, number one, as a frame of reference for mental fitness. And physical fitness is, we don't wait till we tear an ACL to start strengthening our legs. It's preventative. We have different circuits for how we think about physical fitness, and there's a holistic way that we now engage in physical fitness. And I think it's true for mental fitness as well. And to your point around clinical psychology and, mental health, mental illness was really the first step there. And it was going from -1 to 0 was the hope. Mental fitness is, to your point, something where we want to go from 0 to 1. And so there's a holistic way of just even thinking of the model of mental fitness. There's a way to practice mental fitness as a preventative measure. There's a way to think about mental fitness so that we're more resilient and adaptable. And so I think of it as an anchor point for our capacity to stay, whether it be neutral, whether it be to weather some larger storms or smaller setbacks. When we're mentally fit, we're capable of handling those things a little bit more. When we're mentally fit, we're capable of reaching our growth edge and staying there, staying curious, exploring ways to continue to break through. You know, we're capable of playing the game of both and, where we may not necessarily feel great, but we can still ourselves. We're adaptable when we're thinking about becoming more mentally fit. And I think ultimately it's this ability to build capacity. You know, to go into that flow state is expensive, and it costs precious neurochemicals when we're in flow, but it also requires us to be fully attentive to what it is that we're doing. And it requires us to be able to really channel all of our faculties and our vitality and our energy into what it is that we're approaching. And importantly, to wrangle our wandering minds as well. So I frame it more like a holistic way of approaching both mind and body training together. And I think that when we start to explore some of the daily things that we can do to either attain mental fitness or to sustain mental fitness, we start to bring those patterns online, we start to pay attention to it more, and it becomes more visible. You know, my ultimate tagline is that mental fitness is also a competitive advantage. And so I think we also have to bring it back full circle to, yeah, that sounds really great, Damon, but I've got these big goals, right? And my ultimate point is, well, yeah, I know you do. And you need you need some of this to be able to get some of that.
And when it gets difficult, this is what you're going to be relying on.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All
right. We're coming to the end. I've got a question for you. Do you still play tennis?
Yeah, I do. But I don't compete so much. I just play.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're there, you're bouncing the ball, and then someone who's important to you for some reason walks by and your head spins and you go, oh, I better hit a good shot to impress them. And then you suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm in my head. What do you do next to get back into your flow?
I'll probably take a quick step back. We haven't talked about breathing at all today, but breath, I think, is going to be probably a primary skill that I'll employ in that moment, and probably do a little hop step, regroup, and importantly, I'll let whatever that little glitch was that I just went through, I'll allow myself to let that go and release, and really just bring my full capacities back into the present moment again.
Nice. Well, Damon, thank you so much for your time. I always ask guests a couple of questions. One, a book or a film that has had a huge impact on you. I know we've covered The Inner Game. Any others?
Another book would be Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance for me. I think specifically what I love about that book is the fact that it's a meditation on quality, where there's a scene in the book where he's riding with some friends, and one of his friends does not know how to repair his motorcycle, and he's all bent because he's got to fix his bike and somebody else has got to do it. But our main character knows how to fix his motorcycle, and he pays attention to all the details about his own bike, and he's fully immersed in, you know, the maintenance, and then of course the subsequent road trip that they go on. And something about that book struck me as an early guy, where you know, it resonated with me that, you know, to do something and to do it well requires a deep sense of quality. And if you bring that high level of quality, that there's a richness just to that activity itself. It's not the getting to California on the bike. It's being able to be fully capable of handling the bike. So I love that. I love that book. There's a movie, you said book or movie. The movie that comes to my mind, I'm going to age myself here, but it's called Breaking Away. And it's this book that's set in Indiana, rural. It's a local town boy at Indiana University, but he didn't go to school. And he idolized the Italian cycling team. And he pretended he was Italian the whole time, even though his name was like Dave. And he was a great cyclist, and he played this character. But by the end of the book, what really became true to him was that being Dave was enough, and that his capacity to be able to ride as Dave, not as a embodied Italian character, even though the girl he wanted to date and everything else was the flash in the cover story gave way to some sort of deep heart. And even though he was a townie, he sort of found himself through that process. So I love that movie.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Time to flip the mic.
Yeah, we talk a little bit about flow and achieving big, great things. And I think for me, I work with a lot of professional tennis players. I'm the director of mental fitness for the PTPA, and a lot of these players are trying to get from 200 in the world to 100 in the world, from 100 to 50, etc. And my story is always around, yes, and, feeling full as a human being and having well-being in your life is equally important to whatever external goals you have. I'm just wondering how you see flow, not through the lens of high performance, but through the lens of well-being and personal fulfillment.
I've got to cap my own time limit here. I mean,
it's a big one. It's a big one. Sorry, Cameron.
It's a big one. When we look at flow as being a rich experience, and some people might argue a human's richest experience, as you said earlier, we come alive, we actualize our strengths, we become vibrant, we become connected within the moment, and it brings out the best in us. And so we naturally feel that deep sense of satisfaction, meaning from the actions that have just occurred. And over time, that becomes fulfilling, and we can have a sense of life satisfaction. And through those principles and the growth principle that's inherent within flow, in the sense that the more situations that we meet challenge, or we meet complexity, and we stretch our abilities, and we learn, we grow, we become more complex, more capable human beings, our self-construct grows, our self-efficacy, our self-worth, our self-identity grows, and we develop as stronger human beings, and we make better decisions, more aligned with our intrinsic values, and overall well-being sort of increases. And flow has this great potential, I think, where we don't have to separate well-being and performance, because from a biological perspective, the mind, the body, the nervous system, the corticomuscular coherence is at its most synchronous, is at its most effective, its most applicably efficient when we're in flow. So there's a natural biological performance edge we get when we're in flow. Now, from a place of well-being, it provides a window into that space where we can feel great, where we can be intuitive, where we can listen to our intuitive voice and actualize it. And for some people, there's some studies out there, and from war veterans who've got PTSD, and they go surfing and suddenly they're able to access flow again, and it's like, this sort of release valve occurs, and they get this huge influx of feeling great again. And whereas they couldn't replicate that challenging environment prior, right? Or, we look at conversations or writers and there might be that level of complexity or just living life as a whole. There's just too much complexity, and suddenly that complexity becomes our stepping stone, becomes something that we want to embrace, invite, create more of, because we're not afraid to protect. Flow offers us, if flow is that central framework, it offers us an opportunity to prospect in these situations as opposed to protect. And it allows us to feel secure within the unknown, within the vulnerability of it all, and allows us to trust more. And so I think flow as a therapy, flow therapy is increasingly becoming more popular in the sense of we focus on what are our past experiences of flow, how can we recreate flow more in the moment, and how can we look back on these flow experiences and take out strengths, take out confidence, take out satisfaction, take out well-being. Who are the people in our life and the tribe that sponsors it and allows it to flourish? And how can that create a satisfying lifestyle? And flow therapy is getting better and better. And myself, I'm engaged in a concept and practice called flow coaching, where flow is that central ethos towards using a coaching methodology to help people to find their best version of themselves through their own decision making and so forth, but with powerful questions that are helping someone to find their own flow in life. And so we can approach flow and well-being from a number of different, practices, but ultimately it comes back to people have a high sense of well-being when we have good connections. This is what the research suggests anyway. When the relationships are strong, we have a sense of belonging. We have a level of intrinsic motivation, meaning we're doing things that internally resonate, that we want to do, that we feel inspired to do, rather than the stuff we should, have to, must do. And flow encompasses all of that. In flow, we have a radar when we're looking for flow. We're looking for places to connect. We're looking for places to be inspired. And so there's a natural fit where when flow is at someone's true north, as I call putting on a flow mindset, then well-being is, or a greater sense of well-being is a natural consequence of that. I'll stop there because I end up going down lots of different rabbit holes, but hopefully that's... Does that answer the question?
No, yeah, it was beautifully said. I really appreciate the depth to which you answered that question, and I'm pretty sure there's research out there that says that one of the greatest flow triggers is deep conversation. And I feel like over the past, I just looked up at the clock and realized that we're nearly an hour into this, and so. Pretty sure that you and I both found our way into some state of flow throughout some of this through our talk here together as well. Yeah,
it's been great to chat, good to connect.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Damon, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Cameron, for having me on, and thanks for all the work that you do. Hope to see you out there sometime as well.
Absolutely. A few key ideas stood out from this conversation for me. First, high performance isn't always about adding more. Often the breakthrough comes from removing the blockages, the expectations, the narratives, and internal pressures that get in the way of our natural ability to perform. Second, many of the mental habits we develop early in life, coping, forcing, pushing through, can help us succeed, but they can also distance us from the intuitive and embodied state where flow emerges. And lastly, elite performers often rediscover something surprisingly simple: play, curiosity, and presence. When we reconnect with those qualities, we open the door to creativity, adaptability, and deeper engagement with the moment and flow. Ultimately, the path to sustainable high performance isn't just about achieving more. It's about becoming more alive in the process of what we're doing. Thanks for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you want to learn more about flow, I've recently published my book, How to Find Flow, with Blink Publishing. In it, I guide readers through Ready, Steady, Flow, 3 simple steps for high performance, resilience, and personal well-being. You can find the link to my book in the podcast description. If you like this episode, please subscribe, and the next episode will effortlessly drop into your playlist. Bye for now.